Hey guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman, also known as the Comeback Coach. Guys, you don't know, I normally don't do episodes on Tuesday, but because my brother Kelly said I needed to have this brother come on, he's a brand new friend, part of my inner circle now. He's a retired lieutenant commander. He's a Marine, and I love once a Marine, always a Marine. But he also loves the title of husband and father. And that's what I respect about him the most. Also, he's a man after my own heart. So we're going to be talking about how to get unstuck after military career. So make sure you guys hit the subscribe button because you're going to want to share this and watch this over again. Sir, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm doing great, man. And I echo what you said about Kelly. If you guys don't know Kelly Cardenas, he is a tremendous human, right? And that's like the highest praise I can give somebody. Because if I call you a business owner or an electrician or a doctor or a husband or whatever, those are things that you do. They're a part of your identity. But ultimately, becoming the best human you can be is really what it should be about, right? And Kelly is one of those guys that's just clicking on all cylinders. So thank you, Kelly, if you're listening to this.
Yep, thank you. And now we also got the drummer for Def Leppard coming up on the March 20th because of Kelly. So make sure you don't miss that episode. And if you don't know Kelly, make sure you get to know Kelly because he will make you a friend for the rest of your life. So definitely
Right.
So tell us, before I get started, I have a traumatic brain injury. So if I don't say something, I'm never going to remember it. What is your definition of resiliency?
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody has their own take on what it takes to be successful in life. And with some people, it's like, hey, I'm just the most talented person around, or the most intelligent person, or whatever. But that hasn't been my particular journey. What I have seen where people can have success, and what I mean by success is, when I was growing up, I was on WIC and food stamps and in a poor house in Northeast Tennessee, and so success was getting out of Scott County. That was what success initially was, and a lot of people haven't, right? Then once I joined the Marine Corps, success was keeping my Marines alive and executing the mission properly and so on. Now in business, success is achieving our goals and helping as many people as we can, which we'll talk about. But success is, even though it's defined in those different terms for me, the one thing that I learned, and I learned this primarily when I got accepted to the Naval Academy, and I had no business getting accepted to a school that was that hard. I barely squeaked in the door. And I realized once I started there that it was really hard, like super hard academics. Everybody around you is so smart and like have been preparing their whole life to go to this really, really difficult academy. And I almost flunked out. And it was, for me, it was some dark days, really dark days. And I was scared because I didn't have any money. I didn't have anywhere else to go. One of the reasons I applied to the Naval Academy is because they pay for your school, right? And so I didn't have enough money to go to school. And I remember, this is something that it may sound silly, but it has had profound impact throughout my life. And it's the idea of the Rocky mentality. Remember the movie Rocky Balboa? It's like, for me, I know there's all the Creed stuff, and those are all great movies now too. But the original ones, really, for me, are what had an impact growing up. And it wasn't about a movie, and it wasn't about some random story of some dude in Philadelphia. To me, Rocky was never a great boxer. No matter if it's the beginning when he fought Apollo Creed or whenever he was knocking people out, and he was on top for a long time. He was never a good boxer, right? But he was an amazing fighter. And his whole mantra was, it isn't about being the greatest or the most talented, right? It's about being able to take all of the punches that life hits you with and keep moving forward toward your goals. That's what it's about. And I actually took that deeply personally whenever I was getting just hammered on all fronts, physically, academically, socially, everything, at this place where, I honestly felt like I didn't belong. And I remember thinking to myself, I know that I may not belong here, but they're going to have to drag me out of here by my feet. Like, I am never going to quit I'm going to keep moving forward. And as long as my heart is still beating, I'm going to keep fighting for this dream and for this goal. And I somehow got through the Naval Academy. And I remember being in Afghanistan and everything was going to crap. A lot of people were getting hurt and killed. And I was scared. But I had a job to do. And I remember thinking, as long as my heart is still beating, I'm still in this fight. So that's a long answer to your question, Richard. But my definition of resilience is the same really as Rocky's. I stole it straight from Rocky. My definition of resilience in business too, because I've gotten some mad hits in business. And as long, number one, nobody's shooting at me right now, right? So that's perspective, right? How bad can a business problem really be if nobody's shooting at you, right? And second, as long as my heart is still beating, I will regroup and continue marching forward. To me, that's resilience.
All right, now, and I love that. We can end this show right now, and that would be all a person needs right there, especially in business and life, because that's what the whole podcast is about, is becoming resilient in life and business. So we're going to talk about both. Now, I'm a Miami Hurricane fan, but I've always been a Tennessee fan. And actually, one of my best friend's son played quarterback at the University of Tennessee, Jarrett. I actually got him healthy when he got hurt, so I actually did his nutrition. Cool. But one thing I love about the Tennessee and the people of Tennessee is that they're hard workers. They don't give up, and they don't quit. And that's, I mean, I'm sure there's some of them that aren't that way, but for everybody that I've ever met from the state of Tennessee, they've all been hard workers, nose to the grindstone, get out there and grind. So now, so tell us a little about, what you were like growing up and what high school was like, and why did you choose Marine Corps? You could have gone probably everywhere else. If you got accepted to that school, you could have probably got accepted to some other colleges. Why did you choose the Marine Corps?
Well, okay, so those are a couple of different questions, really. The first one, and this is, people ask me all the time to write a book about how I grew up, and the reason is because it was non-traditional. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. My mom and dad. My dad was a blue-collar worker, a bunch of different types of blue-collar jobs. Worked in the bugwoods, worked odd jobs and things like that. Was a truck driver for a long time and an iron worker. And then my mom was a substitute teacher that eventually became a full-fledged teacher. Neither of those professions are high-income professions, right? By and large, or at least it wasn't in the 80s when I was growing up. My mom and dad, I was born in Texas. We lived there near Houston, and then they just dropped everything and decided to load the 7 of us up in a hollowed-out school bus, like the yellow school buses. We rip all the seats out, put in like a one of those Coleman stoves to cook on, and literally created an RV out of an old school bus and drove it where the goal was, as the story goes, that we were supposed to be headed to Canada, and we were going to go live in Canada. And my dad's brother lived in northeast Tennessee in a place called Scott County, Tennessee. And we stopped to see him there and never left. And so I grew up, I remember them parking the school bus. They drove down this hill through a creek into an open area, an open field in the middle of the woods, and parked the school bus there. And we lived there for months. We would literally catch the bus to school. At the top of that, we'd cross the creek and go up the hill and catch the bus to school, to a place called Robbins Middle School. And that's where we would catch the bus to. And we lived out of a school bus for a long time. And then we ended up building a log cabin. No electricity, no running water. We'd get water from a well that we dug. I'm not kidding. This was like 80s, 90s, right? And not in a third world country, in America. and this is how we lived. And I will tell you that it was a simultaneous adventure, but extremely hard life. Hard working, right? Like everybody worked, right? You worked hard. When we built the house ourselves, didn't have contractors, we didn't have anything, so we built all that ourselves. And my dad, I will tell you, did the best that he knew how, but was definitely imperfect. He was not the most loving father. I'll just put it that way. And he was also an abusive alcoholic. And those were him fighting his own demons. But as you know, when you're fighting your own demons, it often brings collateral damage, right? And it's not an excuse, and I don't excuse him for it. I understand it, but growing up that way, there was a lot of stuff to deal with. And so anyway, there's so much we could talk about. But growing up in that was what life was like growing up. And so when I went to high school, I had an interesting experience with it because my mom, being a teacher, always wanted us to be well-read and intelligent and smart academically. And so we studied hard at home. We read books. We didn't have a TV. So, and I never watched 90210 growing up. I remember when I was like 30 and somebody was like, hey, they referenced 90210. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And they were like, well, what about the New Kids on the Block, right? When we were growing up, I guess New Kids on the Block was like the big thing. I'd never heard of them, right? And so it was kind of trippy in a way that I wasn't plugged into kind of the mainstream popular culture, but at the same time, we just read books constantly. And so we all excelled in academics in high school. But at the same time, I never had clean clothes. So I always smelled. We didn't have running water. And so we would take a bath once a week. And, that doesn't necessarily lend to the type of person that people want to hang around with. Right.
So you weren't a chick magnet at this point.
I was not a chick magnet. I did not go on a single date until my senior year. And that's another story, but I never dated at all. Never, because it just wasn't, not just not a chick magnet, but also kind of a pariah in a lot of ways. Right. Because people in school, they tend to not want to hang around the smart kids, right? Especially if that smart kid is arrogant. And I was arrogant because it covered up a lot of the deficiencies that I felt about, and the embarrassment that I felt about being poor. And so I just, so definitely not very popular in high school, and also struggled a lot with, just all of the things. I mean, our car would break down every single week on the way to school. Every single week we'd be trying to fix it on the side of the road, and the school bus would go by, and it was just part of life. And it, it sucked. So, but anyway, one of the things that created in me and in a lot of us is a complete and utter burning desire to get out of that kind of life, to take the lessons from that kind of life of resilience and of hard work and tenacity and stuff like that, but not to live like that, because it sucks. It really does suck being poor. So that burning desire, I talk about this all the time now. In order to do something to change the trajectory of your life, you can be motivated by two things: the pursuit of pleasure or fleeing from pain. And in my experience, pain works better, right? So if you're listening to this and you do not like the life that you're in, if you're feeling pain, whether it's, pain from, a lack of accomplishing what you might have wanted to, or a physical pain, or an emotional or a relationship pain, or maybe you're addicted to something, or whatever, all of the crap that we do to ourselves and other people do to us to hurt us, that pain can be your greatest tool. It can be that you can look back at that pain and be immensely grateful for it one day. I am, right? I can still feel the shame and embarrassment and that I felt over and over. I can still remember what it was like to eat beans and rice every single day for a week straight, because that's all the food that we had, right? I can remember what it's like to walk into a store and to have one food stamp and to have to put stuff back out of the cart every single time, because we'd load groceries up in the cart, we'd get to the checkout aisle, and then inevitably we wouldn't have enough money to pay for it. So I would go back and I would stick them all back into the aisles, right? I remember, and a dozen other stories like that, right? I remember my dad used to abuse my mom in front of us like a child. He would literally take his belt off and whip her until she cried if she, disobeyed him, right? I never forgive him for that. I won't forget. If he listens to this podcast, he knows he's not forgiven. But, well, let me rephrase. I forgive him, but I will never forget that. My heart is seized up right now because I still have that reaction to hearing her crying and begging him to stop, right? And I can tell you this: I swear to you and before God, I will never have that experience in my relationship with my wife, and my kids will never have that experience seeing their mother and father interact that way. That's taking pain and creating something positive out of it. And so I am grateful for that experience, right? So I know that went off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's growing up that way. Man, I tell you, it could be the greatest blessing ever if you take your hardships right now and use it as fuel to turn it into something beautiful that changes the trajectory of your family forever.
And well, and I'm thinking because I went through a lot of the same stuff. And for me, now that I'm older, way older, and hopefully a little bit wiser, but I'm realizing from I think you're like my 550th episode or something. But when we're going through that at that age, we realize when we turn 18, 19, we can either get bitter or we can get better.
Yeah.
And some of us take one way and some of us take the other. And you took the other way and you joined the Marine Corps. But first, you got to tell us, what your thought process is in joining. Why the Marine Corps? Why the hardest of them all? Were you just a glutton for punishment?
There's a bit of that. It didn't start that way. I knew that I wanted to be a Marine. Here's the interesting part. My dad was a Marine in Vietnam. He didn't join voluntarily. He was drafted, right? And he joined the Marine Corps, and he wasn't a great Marine. He got busted down to Lance Corporal 3 times, right? Or rather, busted down twice. So he was a 3-time Lance Corporal, right? And for disobeying, for insubordination, for fighting, all that stuff. And he'll tell you this, right? Nevertheless, when he did talk about the Marine Corps, even though he was bitter about his time in the Marine Corps, and he even told us, don't join the Marine Corps, I could see through that. And I could see that one of the proudest things that he saw about his identity was the fact that he did serve as a Marine. He couldn't shake that feeling of pride at being part of that brotherhood, even though he discouraged us from doing it. He told us to join the Air Force, right? He's like, you're going to have a better life if you join the Air Force, right? And he's right, right? Better food, better bases, better everything, right? But I always carried it in me that I said, I want the opportunity to feel that kind of pride about something, about anything, because I don't feel it now, right? And also there's a bit of like, yeah, let's see what I can take, right? I don't know how tough I am. Let's see how tough I am, right? I thought I had a feeling I was pretty tough because, I was chopping, firewood in the middle of the winter, at 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. whenever my fellow students were probably still sleeping, stuff like that. So but out of the high school, when I was in high school, they asked me where I wanted to go to college, because I had good grades, right? And I was like, well, I'd love to go to college, but I can't afford college, right? I don't have any money. And so one of the guidance counselors, and I don't remember his name, unfortunately, but he was like, hey, well, have you considered going to a service academy? And I was like, I don't know what a service academy is, but please tell me more, right? And so he handed me a pamphlet, and on the front of the pamphlet, I'll never forget this picture. It was a group of men and women dressed in a white uniform with white hats on that were in this, like, clearly a formation. And on the top of the formation was this, I think it was 5 blue jets that were screaming overhead with like white smoke coming out of the back, right? And it's, of course, the Blue Angels and the Naval Academy. And I looked at that and I was like, wow, like, that's the most awesome thing I've ever seen. Like, tell me more. And he goes, well, here's the coolest part. I know you don't have any money. If you get accepted to the Naval Academy, you don't have to pay for it. And I was like, what? Like, what kind of witchcraft is this? Like, how is that possible? What kind of scam are you running here, right? And he was like, nah, sure. I found out later, they get their money from you. They just don't do it in the form of charging you, right? I've heard it. I don't know what your audience is like on this podcast. This is going to be a little bit of a risque, but there's a saying at the Naval Academy that it's a $350,000 education shoved up your butt 1 nickel at a time. That's the going saying at the Naval Academy, right? And so it's hard, really hard. But anyway, they said, yeah, you can do it. So I applied, and man, that's a story in and of itself. I barely squeaked in the door. I got denied first and threw all my stuff away, and then I had to dig it back out of the trash and like catch a last minute flight to BWI with the last dollar that I had. and I got there at 4 in the morning on induction day, and induction day starts at 5 in the morning. And so I got no sleep. I mean, it was crazy, right? Everybody's families were like hugging them and being like, "We're so proud of you." And it was just me. I was just like, "I'm here." Right. And so, so I joined the Naval Academy mostly because I thought it was awesome. I thought it was a good school, and I could afford it because they didn't charge you anything for it. But then 9/11 happened. I was actually on duty when the planes flew into the World Trade Center, and I saw it happen, right? So they flew into the World Trade Center. We were like, at first, like most people, like, whoa, that somebody's flight plan is off, right? It's like there's some kind of glitch, air traffic controller glitch or something. And so I moved on with my life. And then like an hour later, the world had changed. There was a combat air patrol off the Roosevelt's carrier group flying over the Naval Academy because we thought we were going to be a target too. And the whole world changed, right? And then shock and awe and the invasion of Afghanistan. And after that, I was like, yeah, no, I have to be a Marine. I have to lead Marines. Not just, I was in aerospace engineering. That was my major. And everybody in Aero went pilot, except me. I said, no, I need to lead Marines, and I need to lead Marines on the ground in Afghanistan. And fortunately, I got to do that 3 times. So that was why I chose most of 9/11.
All right, so let me ask you, because 9/11 changed my life big time. Actually, where I'm sitting right now, if I go stand on my front porch, I can see where the Twin Towers once stood.
Oh, wow.
And we knew people that were in the towers that day. So that day totally changed my life. But I just had another lieutenant colonel, but he went to
West Point.
Yeah, he went to West Point. So we were talking about, leadership. That was the big thing. We had a big discussion. It was all about leadership. About there's a different leadership, because we were talking about George Bush. It was a different president as a peacetime president than a wartime president.
Mm-hmm.
And there's when you're a leader of men and women, I'm not going to say, there's a difference between being a wartime leader and a peacetime leader. Peacetime leader, yeah, like he said, yeah, maybe we screw up, maybe we got to stay in the motor pool till 8 o'clock to sweep it out. Mm-hmm. But when you're outside the wire, somebody fucks up, somebody's not going home.
Yep.
So there's a big difference between being a peacetime leader and a wartime leader. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I do. I think you can do both. It is rare when you can find someone who can do both. That's and I've known leaders in the Marine Corps that have been able to do both. Most people cannot. Most people are good at one or the other, right? And I will tell you, everything has a different wrinkle when you're in combat, including what your job is. Okay, and this one may be a little bit controversial, but this is how we saw it, at least. Your main job as a leader of Marines is to accomplish the mission and bring your Marines home, right? And that's how we were taught it. Accomplish the mission and bring your Marines home, not protect your Marines at all costs and just come home alive, right? And damn everything else, right? That's what you see in the movies, but that's not the reality, and that's not the way you'd want it to be. You do not want a Marine Corps that ultimately is about self-preservation first, because then why have a Marine Corps? You want a Marine Corps to be able to enforce your nation's policies with extreme violence if necessary and protect our American way of life. Like, that's what you want your military to be. You don't want them to be timid. And so when you're in combat, I remember one time we were in a convoy, and our part of our job, I was a combat engineer. So whenever you're advancing forward, it's about explosive demolitions. It's about breaching. It's about counter IED and minesweeping and things like that, right? Whenever you're retrograding, it's about tearing down bases. It's called demilling, right? Demilitarizing bases and tearing them down and retrograding. So demil is actually really dangerous, because it's when you're retreating or whenever you're pulling back that the enemy most likely will be emboldened, and right. So they would backlay us all the time with IEDs, right? And so we would go in and we'd be tearing down the HESCO and run the dozers and doing all that stuff. And then the route that we came in on would just be getting constantly backlayed with IEDs. and I'm talking big ones, 500 pounders, right? And so we're coming back from demilling a base in the Musekela province in Helmand, right? It's called the Musekela Wadi. It's in northern Helmand province. Anyway, so this is southern Afghanistan, right? And we're coming back on this route, and we're in this long convoy, and a vehicle, like 3 vehicles in front of me, just completely engulfed in flame. Throws it up into the air. It turns out it was a 500-pound IED. It throws it up in the air, flips it upside down, and comes down. And the turret gunner gets caught underneath the truck, and it kills him, right? And the A driver, he was a sergeant, one of the sergeants in my platoon. He got his spine essentially crushed, right? He never walked again. Those are horrible things that happen. And in the moment, you see him and you're like, wow. And that's not the end of the story, right? Because it's typically followed by an ambush, right? So you got to protect everybody else. You got to fight your way out of the ambush, and you got to get your people home. And you got to, by the way, you have to bring a wrecker in to now pull this extremely heavy vehicle out, all while protecting people. It's a terrible experience, right? However, the mission has to be accomplished. And so when we actually got him back to the closest base, which was just a very small little base, it was a staging area, there were a lot of people in the group who were, just completely broken up, talking about not continuing on with the mission and just kind of hunkering down and this and that. And to his credit, one of my lieutenants was like, guys, stop. We have a time. There will be a time for us to honor them. There will be a time for us to play taps and to talk about how great they were and to honor their sacrifice. That is not now. We need to load the bodies up right now, and we need to fight our way back through this area so we can get back to the FOB and complete our mission. That's what we need to do right now. So compassion in that instance was tough love, right? Whereas when you're in training back in the States, if somebody gets hurt in training, it's all stop. It's bring out the ambulances. It's like everybody, and then you a lot of times you actually cancel the exercise, and then you talk about safety and you do a safety stand down, and that's appropriate because nobody's shooting at us. But when you potentially face an even worse calamity by going internal and focusing on sympathy and empathy and all of the softer emotions instead of doing the mission, then you're not being a good leader, right? So yeah, there is a difference between, and a lot of things, there's a difference in a lot of things about being a wartime leader and being a peacetime leader.
Now, I had a gentleman name on, his name was Rich Davini. He's a Navy SEAL. He wrote a book called The Attributes. And something I learned from him, he said, whether it's in war, whether it's in business, whether it's in life, you got 3 minutes. If you succeed at something, celebrate for 3 minutes and then move on. If you're taking a loss, mourn for 3 minutes and move on. Because I think a lot of people, whether it's in life or in business, they just keep holding on to that stuff, and it just drags you down, because of stuff that could have happened when you were, like, I'm listening to a book today by my friend Dean Graziosi, and he talks about how, a lot of us are replaying that tape over from when we were 18 or 19 years old, and we're 55, and we're still carrying that around. We never learned to change the tape and move on. So I totally get, I get what you're talking about. Now, how many years did you do in the Marine Corps?
So I was active duty for just around 17. And then I transitioned into the reserves. Once I had finished my payback tour after I went to the Naval Postgrad School in Monterey. I finished a payback tour at the MEF at Camp Pendleton. And then my wife and I started having children, bought a house here, and it was like, you know what, I've dragged her around the country and around the world and made her sacrifice long enough. So I'm going to transition into the reserves, finish my time in the reserves, and then go into White Feather full time.
All right. So now you're out of the reserves? You're done?
No, technically I'm now, let's see. I was promoted to lieutenant colonel right after I transitioned into the reserves, and then I lose track, right? Because I think I got another year left before 20, something like that.
All right, so I'm going to ask you something that's maybe a little bit of controversy, and I don't want to get caused any drama, but I had Lieutenant Colonel Schiller on, and we were talking about how many guys that I personally know that were in Afghanistan, lost friends in Afghanistan, got hurt in Afghanistan. When that whole pullout happened, we had so many veterans, they just felt like their heart was ripped out. And they felt like, why did we even go in the first place? So have you talked to soldiers that have felt that way about the pullout, or not really?
Yes. You can ask my wife. I took a day when that happened, because remember, I didn't go to Iraq. I went to Afghanistan 3 times, right? I spent over 2 years of total time in Afghanistan. I loved my time in Afghanistan. I thought it was worthwhile. I thought it was, important. And, I look back on it, and I will forever be grateful for the opportunity to lead Marines and be led by Marines in Afghanistan during the time that I was there. And it happened so fast that you couldn't help it. I can only speak for me personally. It happened so fast that I could not help but feel the whiplash effect of it. And the natural human tendency is to say, wow, we just wasted 20 years. And we lost people and so on. That's that natural tendency. And I spent some time going through all of the pictures, because I've got thousands of pictures and videos, as we all do, of all the time we spent there and everything. And then I read something that I thought it was a Facebook post that was like, it changed dramatically the way that I saw it, because I didn't want to see it this way, but I didn't see any other way to be. It's like, okay, within a few days, the Taliban has now taken back control of the country. It's like, it's really hard to see it any other way, right? And the Afghans that we trained just laid down their weapons, and it's like, because I was actually on an embedded training team. I primarily did that on my first tour, and then second and third tour, we were adjacent and worked with embedded training teams, whose job it was to train the Afghan National Army to defend the country themselves against the Taliban. And then they all lay down their weapons and basically, and I'm not a geopolitical guy or any of that kind of stuff. I'm just a Marine, right? And I saw a Facebook post that basically said, the way that I'm looking at this isn't that we just spent 20 years and accomplished nothing, because that's not true. Because the people that were born, the girls especially, that were born 2 years after we entered Afghanistan, have been able to go to school. They've become helicopter pilots. They've become doctors. They've become scientists, and they actually serve in government, right? Because they're 22 years old, or 18, 19, 20 years old, right? So the people that lived in relative peace, and I say relative because, yeah, it's more violent than here, but it was way less violent for most of the country, way less oppressive for most of the areas we were at than it was before we were there, right? And so people got to grow up, an entire generation got to grow up seeing that and getting access to news reports that are outside of their small town, hearing about places of opportunity. There are thousands and thousands of Afghans that would still be in Afghanistan that are now here in the United States, applying for their citizenship and going to school and raising families and wanting to be good Americans, good Afghan American, right? And so there's an indelible impact, positive impact, that's been made in the time that we were there. And if I have a choice, like we all do, to look at 2 possible ways of seeing this. One is, I wasted my time, my Marines' lives were wasted, and I feel bad. Versus looking at the other truth, which is so many people's lives were impacted positively because what we did. And by the way, the Taliban ruling Afghanistan right now is different than the Taliban ruling Afghanistan before we went. It's completely different. There's a lot more accountability. There's a lot more exposure, and so on, right? A lot more international attention and everything. So I don't know. I'm, again, just a Marine. I don't know nothing for nothing, but I definitely felt a lot more like my time was valuable when I focused on the things we accomplished versus the things we didn't.
All right, so I want to thank our sponsors, and then I want to get into transitioning. I want to get in talking about White Feather. I want to talk about all that. But guys, as you know, I was in the military for over 23 years. I was with GNC for over 30. I loved pre-workouts, but they all tasted like ass, and they kind of didn't work for me. Usually, if I would drink coffee, it would go right through me. So I decided to come out with my own coffee. So we came out with Vertical Momentum coffee. It's a high energy coffee, twice the caffeine, twice the energy, no crash. And the best part of it, it's all hand roasted by veteran hands. And 100% of the proceeds go to help Project Die Hard, which actually helps veterans dealing with homelessness and PTSD. Project Die Hard, we're actually setting up it's called a forward operating base called FOB Rush. It's going to be where 12 single soldiers and 4 soldiers with their whole family can come get taken care of for 1 whole year, medically, financially, physically, spiritually. And it's going to cost the soldier $0. So if you guys love coffee, if you love a mission like that, 100% of the proceeds, 100% of the proceeds go to help veterans struggling with homelessness and PTSD. And as you guys know, I'm a diabetic, so I can't really use sugar anymore. So my friend, he has a company called Buzzy Bees. He's actually a beekeeper, so they're actually his bees. And he actually sent me some honey, and I've been using that instead of sugar. And I lost 7 pounds so far, and my blood sugar dropped over 180 points just by using pure honey. So if you guys love honey, check out Buzzy Bees honey. And they also make lollipops, but I ate mine already. So definitely check out Buzzy Bees. So those are the guys that they're showing. Without them, I wouldn't be able to have a show on the air. So if you love coffee, if you love honey, check them out. So, sir, let me ask you a question, because I think this is the only show that I've heard it talked about. You know, we always hear about the veterans coming home. You know, we always hear about the post-traumatic stress, or post-traumatic growth, depends on who you talk to. Mm-hmm. We talk about the money issues, but you know, one thing we never talk about, or at least I don't hear about it talked on any other show but this one, is a lot of us come home with moral injuries. Like I had a friend, he was a helicopter pilot in Afghanistan. He said, yeah, you know, we accidentally took out a schoolhouse. Yeah. And we're dealing with moral injuries, you know, and you don't really hear about talking about moral injury. I mean, you hear about the PTS, but they're not really digging into the actual trauma. So you know, and a lot of people deal with, you know, we losing people over there. So I think those two things need to be talked about a little bit more. What are your thoughts?
My first deployment, we were stationed along the border of Pakistan at something called a BCP, a border checkpoint, or border crossing point. They called it both things. Anyway, it had signs up basically telling vehicles that, you know, this was a no crossing zone, that you had to have permission and so on. And they had these things called Jenga trucks, which are like these big trucks that carry a lot of cargo and stuff like that. And they have all kinds of little decorations and stuff over them. Anyway, so one night a Jenga truck comes blaring in, and they're not slowing down. They're right past the signs. And I mean, you have to understand that, like, you can pack a lot of explosives inside one of those trucks, and they've been used in the past to run in and be a suicide bomber, essentially, that would, you know, that hits bases, that hits front gates. Oftentimes it's followed up by another attack. So when you see a truck that is coming at you, you don't know what it's in it, and you give it warnings, right? All of the signs are warnings, and then they shoot little pin flares, and the little flares they're meant to deter you. All that stuff happened, and they kept going right toward the front gate. And so so they lowered what essentially is an anti-aircraft gun. These are the Afghan soldiers that are on the wall. They lowered what's essentially this anti-aircraft gun, and they just started hammering it, and it just Swiss cheese this Jenga truck. And they stopped, and you hear people screaming and crying, and we go out there, and the driver is okay, but his brother, who was lying in the back seat, took a round right up through the spine, and it blew the top of his body off. And he was innocent, right? There were no explosives. There were no anything. There was no, to the best of our knowledge, malintent. We don't know why to this day he didn't heed any of the warnings, right? And his brother, even if he did have malintent, his brother did not. He was asleep, right? And so that was something that was they ended up conferring with the local leaders, and they ended up basically paying him, right? They gave him money for his brother's death, right? And then he went on his way. And I think about that, like, you can't help but feel responsible, even though I wasn't on the gun, right? I was there. Can't help but feel responsible. You can't help but ask yourself what you could have done. And if you put yourself in that position, and if I'm driving and I don't know, for whatever reason, just make a bad decision and my brother gets killed because of it, like, you see things like that. And then, for us, I mean, I lost soldiers, Afghan soldiers over there, a lot of them. And we had a lot of Marines get injured and a few of them get killed. You deal with stuff like that, and where it really affects you, if you let it, at least from my experience, is, when you're alone, typically at night when you're alone, and you know how it is. Like, we all are alone with our thoughts at night as humans, and it can be the most difficult time for a human, being alone with your thoughts, right? And that's when for whatever reason, all of the negative thoughts, all of the doubts, all the fears, all the anxieties, everything comes in. And if you're not taught how to deal with that constructively, then you just try to avoid it. And the easiest way to avoid it is by taking drugs, or by drinking, or by prostitution, or you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a ton of different ways that people avoid those things, and almost none of them are constructive, right? Which is why we have so much veteran homelessness, why we have so much veteran suicide, and substance abuse and so on. And I mean, I know you've had personal experience in that realm.
I mean, I have a friend of mine come on, and like I said, I don't know why I have all these friends that are lieutenant colonels. I was the guy that got busted like 6 times. I got thrown out of the military for being a drug addict. So I don't know why I have all these friends. I shouldn't, but I had Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann come on, and he was a fighter pilot, and he says, one thing we can start doing now is they have something that when they're flying, it's called, they chair fly before each mission. And they talk about, well, what happens if we take out a school? What happens if this happens? And they kind of prepare the soldier for what happens and to get him emotionally ready. And he says a lot of times when you prepare somebody like that, I mean, it's still hard to deal with, but it's a little bit easier because they know what they're going into. So I think that's something we really should start looking at a little bit. It's called chair flying. Now let me ask you a question. I know because you're still in a way, so it's you're not transitioning out. But from what I've noticed, like I said, we've had over 550 interviews. That when a veteran gets out of the military, a lot of times we miss our camaraderie. We miss our mission. We miss our paycheck. And then, as we all know, when you step off base, the military doesn't give a shit about you. So your phone stops ringing. And a lot of time, that's when we end up looking at a bottle of whiskey and having a 45 in our hand. So please talk about, I know you've talked to a lot of military transitioning, getting out, or veterans. What have you been seeing in the last couple of years with militaries transitioning out?
You are 100% right. You take somebody who has been trained and has focused their time and attention on a singular purpose, and that purpose is doing their mission in the most extreme of situations, whether you're on a submarine, on a ship, in Afghanistan, in a plane, right? You're focused only on that. You're not focused on, paying the bills. You're not focused on learning soft skills and coding and things like that, right? By and large, as a military, especially as an infantry person or somebody that's in combat arms, you focus entirely on your job. Otherwise, you're going to get people killed. And so, and it also is a sense of purpose. And you come together, especially in tough situations like combat, you come together like brothers and sisters that you've never felt before, right? And you're recognized. You're given very specific feedback, like awards and recognition and promotions, and it's a very easily understood structure, and it's a rigid structure. Now you take that person who has learned to thrive in that rigid structure with that immediate feedback loop, and with all the other ancillary parts of their life taken care of, like mortgage and electricity and all of those other stuff you don't even know, or balancing a checkbook, whatever. And you, one day to the next, on the other side of the DD-214, you have no friends, you have no structure, you have no feedback loop, you have no purpose, you do not have marketable skills, not really. I believe personally that you do, but most of society would say, oh, well, we don't have any IDs for you to clear, we don't have any doors for you to breach, right? So maybe we can fall back on your soft skills. Do you know how to, write code or whatever, right? And you say all of that at once, and then you see this massive loss of purpose and focus and status and the financial one. And people are forced to take jobs to pay the bills, right? And inevitably that job is less rewarding by and large than the one that they came from. And oftentimes it's not even as high paying, because high paying, $50,000 in the civilian world is not equal $50,000 in the military, right? Because the military, there's a lot of stuff that you get that doesn't include your paycheck. It's not included in your paycheck, and you don't get taxed as much. So, and here's the crazy part, Richard. You may think I'm talking about E4s, right? And that's normally who people think I'm talking about. You may think I'm talking about that sergeant that got out or that whatever. I know full bird colonels who retire. So, 50% of retirement pay. So it's not like they're going to starve, but they immediately lose half of their pay plus BAH. And at that level, at the 06 level, that's a lot of money. So so even though they have enough money to survive, there is a wild difference in one day making $150,000 a year and the next day making $50,000 a year. That dramatically impacts your sense of self-worth. Now imagine you're a full bird colonel, essentially you're a god walking around on base. The next day, if you show up at work after your DD-214, they're going to be like, what are you doing here, sir? You don't have a place anymore, right? And by the way, you're over 50. So you spent your entire adult life in this one singular purpose, and then boom, imagine what that does to your psyche and to your sense. And then the question isn't like, hey, I'm a 26-year-old former sergeant with my whole life out ahead of me, I just got to figure it out. Now you're a 50-something-year-old who is tempted to ask the question, is the best behind me? That's even more scary in a lot of ways, even though they're not facing maybe the same financial challenges as that young person. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, well, obviously, because I'm a 54-year-old man. Yeah. So I'm right in that middle, so I get it. But let me ask you a question, because when I got deployed stateside after 9/11, 2003, 2004, and we were charged with manning the military bases of Fort Jackson. I would see these brand new Dodge Ram 1500s. I'd see the new Corvette, the new Mustang, and they're all E1s, E2s, E3s. And then I'd see the old first sergeant coming behind in a hoopty, but his house is paid off, his car is paid off. So I think, because you're taught when you join the military, usually you buy a car, you get involved with a stripper. These are things that happen on base. You're not taught how to, or at least I wasn't when I went in 1986.
No, they're still not.
I wasn't taught how to open a checking account. I wasn't taught how to write a check, balance an account, build my credit. I didn't know you could bounce a check till I bounced one and I got locked up.
Yeah.
So, the reason I'm saying that is because now I'm a big sports guy and I'm a big NBA guy. Before you even allowed to join the NBA, they send you through classes to learn how to manage your finances. So if they're doing that for people putting a ball in a hoop, why
Yeah.
aren't we doing that for the soldiers that are putting their life on the line? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's actually it's amazing to me. And I will tell you this, I do think that it's not it's we can't just like look at the military and say, oh, the military's not doing this well. In America, we don't learn this. Did you have had you ever, and you may not even know this now, I know because I've never asked you, but like, did you know you can self-direct your IRA into real estate? Most people don't know that, right? Most people don't. And did you know that you can create a small business and dramatically minimize the biggest expense of your life, which is taxes? Number one, most people don't know the biggest expense of their life is taxes. They think it's housing or food, right? Number two, they don't know that you can have a small business even with a full-time job, right? I see people, I've talked to thousands of people over the years, and the whole point of White Feather, the business that we have, is to help military people create financial freedom, right? And so I have these consultations with people where I kind of go over their fine. And dude, I will have routinely, like college graduate, successful corporate world types who will be carrying a $50,000 balance on their credit card and have $50,000 in a bank account and not know why that's terrible, right? And the reason it's terrible, for those of you who are wondering, you shouldn't feel bad, we're not taught this stuff, is because the interest on the credit card is probably anywhere between 15 and 25%. And the interest that you receive in your checking account is like 0.8. So you're literally hemorrhaging money away by carrying it on a toxic thing like a credit card. And again, I'm not like saying that credit cards are bad. I have lots of them. In fact, almost everything I buy on credit cards, but I don't carry a balance. I pay it off before I pay any interest, right? Because so my point in saying that is that nobody teaches this stuff. So it's not just the military, right? Outside in high school, you learn about like, A squared plus B squared is C squared, which I've never used once in my entire adult life. But you don't learn about arbitrage or rental income or taxes, or you know what I'm saying? It's like,
like for me, I had the authors of Rich Dad Poor Dad come on the show because that was the first money book I've ever read, and it changed my whole life, my whole perspective. Realizing that your home is not an asset; it's a liability. When you look at it, it's the bank's asset. It's so a lot of people don't realize just the basic stuff of money, how money actually works. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And I will tell you that's Rich Dad Poor Dad was the book that changed my mind as well, and millions of others. And it was because I told you before at the beginning, like how do I define resilience? Well, it starts with mindset, right? And how do you change the trajectory of your life? It starts with mindset. And if you believe that your past equals your future, and you believe that the people that you grew up with are an indication of your future, then you are, right? But if instead you unlock the potential of what is actually out in front of you, you can be anything you want. You can become a multimillionaire. You can become financially free. You can make massive impact in people's lives. You can find a loving spouse and raise beautiful children. You can live the American dream if you first open your mind to it. And that's what that book did for me, is it showed me that, wow, I can go from WIC and food stamps to multimillionaire generational wealth just by using real estate, right? And so once that mindset was in place, and that's where we start. That in White Feather, anybody I talk to, that's where we start. Is we start with talking about what it is they're trying to accomplish and why. And then we focus on kind of the blocking and tackling of, okay, based off of your asset laydown, you can take these actions, right? And sometimes they're huge actions. Sometimes they're very little, like pay off that credit card that's draining you dry, right? Step one, right? And, once people see, what I found is once people see what's possible and they see that the steps it takes to get there are not that daunting, it's one thing at a time, one step in front of the other, then they change their mindset forever and they'll never go back. They'll never go back to thinking, like you mentioned, with a poverty mindset again. Once you've got a wealthy mindset, which is free, by the way, The number one difference between someone who's destined to be wealthy and someone who's destined to be poor is mindset. And it's the first thing that costs no money to create. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I mean, like I just finished a book called "The Secret" by Miss Rhonda Byrne, and it talks about how the world is going to give you exactly what you ask of it, whether that's failure, whether that's success. It's called the law of attraction, and it's the law. So it's the law for everybody. You attract you attract what you put out there. And like my mentor, Mr. Ed Milet, always talks about the reticular activating system in the brain. Whatever your mind searches for, that's what it's going to find. So whether if your mind's searching for real estate deals, guess what? Somewhere down the line, there's going to be a real estate deal coming. But if you're also searching for, well, the next banks are going to crash like the two that did today. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you're just looking for disasters, you're going to find disasters.
Oh, right? 100% right. 100% right. Actually, to that point, it's what you focus on and what you put your eyes and your ears on is ultimately what's going to be your world. And so I actually don't ever watch the news, ever. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, I don't ever watch the news. And the reason is because if you look at an analysis of news stories, you will see a 10-to-1 negative news versus positive news. Right? And it's very simple to understand why, right? And this is ubiquitous across all news, all cable news network shows. And the reason is because bad news sells, right? It just, the amygdala in our brain, the fear center, excites so much more on the possibility of negative. Like I said, pain motivates more than pleasure. Well, fear motivates more than excitement. And so it just makes sense, right? They're trying to sell, they're trying to make money. And so, but I don't want my life to feel like, I remember my dad used to say when I was a kid, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. That was the whole big thing. World's going to hell in a handbasket, right? And you can find people, especially in my hometown, who say that right now. It's worse than it ever was before. It's going to hell in a handbasket. But when you actually look at the massive advances in human society in the past 50 years, infant mortality is basically almost eradicated. The average human is wealthier by an order of magnitude than they were. You have access to more information, more capability, more abundance than ever before in human history, right? The opportunities are absolutely endless. The human health span has had a 35% increase, right? People are living longer. They're living healthier. I can go on and on and on. But the point is, what you listen to, like there's a podcast called Exponential Wisdom. And there's a guy, Peter Diamandis, that I listen to. He does moonshots and mindsets. And he talks about, basically all of the things that they're doing right now that have improved human life and human potential and will continue to do so with exponential technologies and all of that, biotech and AI and all. It's an amazing world. Like there has never been a more exciting time in human history to be alive than right now, right?
We're living the best of times. I believe we're living in the best of times.
We are.
We are, but and we're going to talk about real estate for a minute, but it's amazing how you can buy real estate and not even be in the same state or country doing deals over Zoom and over fax. You can be doing real estate deals and not even have to be in the same room as the buyers or the purchasers. When else could you do that?
Richard, my wife and I personally own about 35 units around the United States in like 6 or 7 different states. And we're part of limited partners of syndications of several thousand units around the United States. Even though all of those things exist, we have only ever been inside one of those properties physically ourselves. The one we used to live in on Sun Valley here. Well, 2, the one we live in now. And then I'm talking about investment properties though. We've been inside 1 out of 35. I've never even seen the inside personally of all these others because you don't need to. To your point, you can have video walkthroughs, you can have FaceTime, you can do, Zillow, you can do pictures, you can do Google walkthroughs, right? You have professional inspectors and property managers and so on that handle all that. They collect the rent, they run all their books, they issue you the deposit electronically into your bank account and send you an email with your property management statements. I spend less than an hour a month on all of those properties because of what that wasn't possible 50 years ago, not even close, you know?
Yeah. And I also had a gentleman on, and he does real estate, because I think real estate, like, Robert Kiyosaki and Sharon Lecter said, get yourself some property because they're not making no more land. But he also says, a lot of people don't realize with your VA loan, you can buy a duplex. You can buy multiple property. You could buy a big property with your VA loan, but a lot of people think, well, I can just buy my single family home. That's not the case, right?
Oh my God, dude, the VA loan, listen to this. The VA loan, in my opinion, is the most powerful tool for building financial freedom that the military offers. The most powerful tool. And the reason is like what you said, don't buy a single family, buy a fourplex and rent the other 3 units out, right? I know a guy right now who bought, and this is going to blow your mind. He bought a $1.3 million fourplex in San Diego with the VA loan, 0 down. He's renting the other 3 out. And as he's owned it about almost 3 years now, he has gradually increased the rent over time. He put solar on top of it and is charging them for the energy and so on. All together, he is living in what is now a almost $2 million property in San Diego for free. He lives in 1 unit. The other 3 units pay for all the expenses, and he's living there for free, and it's paying itself down, and it's appreciating. And he used the VA loan and put $0 down on it. You tell me that property mathematically will make him an equity millionaire within the next 5 years. And anybody can do this. He didn't do anything crazy, right? And you can do it on a small scale too, right? You can buy I know a guy who bought a duplex in Fayetteville, and it was like $160,000 or something like that. And the day that he moved in, he was living for free because he rented out the other side with enough to cover the mortgage and the expenses. Anybody can do that.
And your credit score, I mean, it can be less than 600 on some occasions, right?
Yeah, you'll have to have a lender that's willing to work with you with the low credit scores. But obviously the higher the credit score, the better. But the VA is much more lenient on credit scores. They're much more lenient on debt to income. They want you to have a house. The VA wants you to own a house.
And it's backed by the government.
Right.
You can't get any, So talk about, tell us a little bit about White Feather and what you got going on.
Yeah, so White Feather is something that kind of spawned out of just my wife and me, buying rental properties and educating ourselves and learning and wanting to build financial freedom with real estate, inspired by the Rich Dad Poor Dad. And so we did that for like 10 years. I'm passionate about real estate. So I was always blabbing while on deployment and exercises and things like that to my friends. And they were all like, man, if we ever get a chance to be involved with White Feather, with what you're doing, then that's awesome. But we never really had any opportunity for them to. We were just buying rental properties ourselves. So I ran into about 5 years ago. Actually, it was February of 2017. I remember the day. This guy who was a turnkey rental provider in Memphis, Tennessee, right? So I grew up on the east side of Tennessee. Memphis is on the west side of Tennessee. So he ran a company that would find these properties, these beat up properties. He'd buy them cash, renovate them, put a tenant in place, put a management company, right? Have them managed, and then sell them at full price to investors. And so my wife and I decided to sell some of the properties we had here in California that we bought in 29 Palms and so on, and use them to do what's called a 1031 exchange and buy properties in Memphis, right? So 1031 exchange, you don't have to pay any tax as long as you use it to buy other real estate. And so we were doing that, and we were like, man, this is great. We're getting better properties, nicer properties, better rent and everything, not paying any tax on it. This is great. And turns out he was like, I asked him, I said, hey, Matt, I've got a bunch of buddies who've been wanting to do this for a long time, but I've never had any additional capability. I was like, do you have any other deals like this? And he was like, yeah, I've got 35 of them. And so I was like, whoa, we could do, I was like, what if I, really just educate my friends, teach them how to do cash flow analysis, teach them how to understand appreciation and all the other stuff for real estate. And then I match them up with properties. And then like they buy these properties and I don't want to have to charge them anything for it, but I'm not going to do it for free. So I told Matt, the turnkey provider, I said, hey, you got to hire a real estate agent anyway to sell these things. They're going to charge you 6%. Why don't I charge you less than half of that? And so we agreed that we would do this, and I'd get essentially a referral fee for everyone we did. Well, it caught on like wildfire. Like, people started talking and they were like, this is amazing. This is freaking awesome. We're doing this. And in the next 2.5 years, we bought a little over 300 properties from them, and collectively as a group. And so, that led to a lot of people wanting to be trained more intensely and to be able to build businesses themselves. And so we created a training plan called the Real Estate Accelerator. We've helped people buy properties all over the U.S. and build businesses. And we as a collective group are all working toward financial freedom together. And however that's defined, for some people, it's like, I've got one guy, Taylor, who was in the Army, currently is in the Army, actually. He transitions out in like 2 months. He's not even 30 years old. He comes into White Feather, goes through the accelerator, and even though he doesn't have much money, literally like $30,000 from a career starter loan, he uses like BRRRR strategies and creative acquisitions like sub-2 and seller financing and so on. And he's built up to, he's got over 30 units now. He's cash flowing, net cash flow above his financial freedom number, which is like $14,000 a month or something like that. And so he's transitioning out of the Army, and he and his wife are moving down to Florida, and he's not going to get another job, Richard. He's not even 30, and he's not going to get another job. He's going to build his dream together with his wife, right? That's an example of what's possible. And when I see things like that, I'm like, God, he's never going to, it's highly unlikely he ends up homeless or depressed or suicidal, or, you know what I'm saying? Because he has purpose and he has passion and he has freedom, right? And he's growing his family, and that's what I want, right? If I could have everybody.
Like when I bought the Purple books and I read that 1031 exchange, I'm like, all right, that's got to be bullshit. And
Yeah.
So when I interviewed him, I'm like, okay, so I can buy a $200,000 house, exchange it for a $400,000, and then exchange that at $400 for an $800, and then $800 to $1.6 million, and I don't have to pay any tax on it. He's like, exactly. And I was in shock. And a lot of people don't even know what we're talking about. A lot of people has never been taught about that. A lot of people just think, well, I'm going to sell a house, I'm going to buy another one, and then they're paying tax out the wazoo instead of using the 1031 exchange.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And the 1031 exchange is just one of the strategies. I mean, it's like some of the wealthiest people I know pay the least amount in taxes, and they do it legally just by using the tools that are available to them, and it just, whenever you're growing up, not in that world, nobody talks about taxes. Although death and taxes is inevitable. That's all you hear, right? Nobody talks about this stuff. Nobody teaches this stuff. So
I love it. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about what you got going on. Tell us about because I know I've seen something about solar. So talk to us about solar.
We did solar for 3 or 4 years out here in Southern California. It was just a business really of opportunity, because energy rates are so ridiculous in Southern California, and solar is kind of the way everything is going. So we created a company a few years back to provide solar to our members. It's kind of just a side job, but I'll as an entrepreneur, I will build a business wherever there's opportunity, as long as it fits into the mission of White Feather.
All right. So if I'm a 45-year-old male, father of 3, just getting out of the military, about to retire, what would be your top 3 pieces of advice you would give to that soldier coming out of the military?
Yeah. First thing is, you've got to surround yourself with the right people. So, and what I mean by that is people who have lives that look like the life you want to build to, right? So if you want to go become an engineer, then you got to surround yourself with successful engineers. If you want to become a business owner, surround yourself with successful business owners and network like crazy. It ultimately, everything becomes easier. Everything becomes more accessible if you have the right network in place. I would say also, ask yourself what you want to be doing in 10 years. And really ask yourself. Don't crowd it out with, oh, what do I need to do to provide for my family? or what can I possibly do based off of what I've experienced before? No. Ask yourself what you want your ideal day to look like, and be honest, and talk to your spouse about it. What does he or she want your ideal day to be looking like? Right? And talk it through. I wake up in the morning without an alarm clock because I'm sick of waking up to an alarm clock, or whatever. It could be your version. But my version is I don't like alarm clocks. So I want to wake up when the sunlight wakes me up and when my body naturally wakes up. Right? That to me is part of my freedom dream. I want to be able to do a job or a business that impacts people that I enjoy, that I'm good at, that I would do for free, but I can figure out a way to improve people's lives and get paid for it. I want to be able to do it from anywhere. Right? My family and I are going down to Guatemala and Costa Rica and to live for several months here in May. Right? And I'm going to be able to do my job from down there because, like you said, we live in a world where we're interconnected. And so, what if you know what I'm saying? Exactly. What if you want to have a podcast and impact people's lives through your podcast and who you interview or whatever? Just craft out what you want your ideal day to look like, and don't worry about how you're going to afford it because that'll come next. Right? And then you really want to ask yourself, like, how long you're willing to work to achieve that goal. Right? That's kind of the breakdown of what we do. Is like, in my mind, financial freedom is the portal. It's the gateway through which the rest of your life begins. Because if you have financial freedom, and let me just frame this. A great way to do it is look at how much money it takes to pay for your lifestyle. And if that money's coming in passively without any interaction from you, then that's financial freedom. That means all 24 hours, you get to do whatever you need to do, whatever you want to do, because your lifestyle is being paid for by passive income. That's financial freedom to me, right? So let's say it's 10 grand a month, right? What we essentially would do, and I do this with people like all the time, right? It's the number one focus, right? Is where do you want yourself to be? Like, what's your ideal day look like once you're financially free? Okay, how long are you willing to work to become financially free? To work, to invest, to do a side job, to do whatever, right? Let's say it's $10,000 a month and you're willing to work for 10 years to get that, right? Okay, now let's look at what you have. What's your savings? Like, how much money do you have in the stock market? Do you have any money in an IRA? What's your income look like? You're about to transition out of the Army. If you're 45, you may have done a career, so you're probably going to get 50% of base pay plus disability. That probably is going to be enough to take care of at least the primary parts of your life. So now let's talk about what you're going to do with your time to create income and what you want to create a side income with as a business, because everybody should have a small business, because that's how you unlock extra streams of income and unlimited tax losses, right? Where you can minimize your tax. And then we'll talk about what your investments are going to look like. I believe that building financial freedom should go through rental real estate of various types, single family, multifamily, short-term rentals, whatever. So what is your plan for building up enough assets to where the income from those assets by the 10-year mark exceeds $10,000? And that sounds like a simple formula, because it is. It's just math. If you just do the work and you get enough base hits, you will be free from passive income. So that's
and I love it. Something I wrote down is I'll talk to people that aren't successful, and then I talk to people that are successful, and I'll ask them the same question. I'll say, show me your vision board. Mm-hmm. And the one that aren't successful, they ain't got one.
Yeah.
But the people that are successful, either they have a vision board. Like for me, when I open up my phone, I'll actually open up my phone. It has a picture of the house that I want on it. It has a picture of the boat that I want on it, and the exact car that I want on it. So whenever I look at it, I know, okay, I don't have it yet, but it's coming. Like when I go to my mailbox every day, I touch it and I say, the checks are coming.
Yeah.
So I'm drawing all that to me. And, so I think vision boards and visualization help a lot when you're trying to become successful.
And they absolutely do. And yes, I've got a vision board, and the car that I'm currently driving was once on my vision board. We have season tickets to, the Chargers, which was once on my vision board. Stuff like that, right? financial freedom, like income goals. That was once on my vision. We're building a house for or housing a homeless vet. That was once on my vision board. So now that's come off. And now there are other things that are on it, right? And so you accomplish things. But yeah, I would agree with you. I think every successful, at least every successful business owner, an entrepreneur, right? I don't know too many doctors that have vision boards, and you would probably consider them at least financially successful. But like every person who creates generational wealth and has a business and is an entrepreneur, yeah, everyone I know has a vision board and talks about it, you know?
Yeah. So now, how do we find you? How do we support your mission? How do we go about, like I said, Kelly hooked us up. So how do we go about, either getting taught by you or learning by you or getting involved in White Feather?
Yeah. I mean, well, there's a couple of different ways. Whitefeatherinvestments.com is the website, and that's where, you can learn a little bit about it. And there's some other podcasts and stuff that I've been on there. And then, honestly, man, I'm this is a very personal business. We don't do a lot of sales and marketing. It's all kind of organic. So, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Facebook under Buddy Rushing, my nickname, Buddy Rushing. On LinkedIn, it's a little more professional. It's my actual name, Edward Rushing. And if you want, you can put like the links in so people can maybe find it. Yeah, but yeah, Facebook or LinkedIn, just send me a message, or if you want to send me an email, you could probably find that somewhere too. It's just Buddy Rushing at whitefeatherinvestments.com. Yeah, this is a personal business. Everybody that's in White Feather, I know personally, and because think about it, man. If let's just say you were a part of White Feather and you're on board with the mission. I want to create financial freedom in order to create like a life of purpose and passion, and I want to help other military do the same. That's what we all sort of aspire to. That may take you 10 years. And if it's going to take you 10 years, I have to know you. I have to touch base with you. I have to continually help you, because not everybody's going to be a tailor where they accomplish it in 2 years. In fact, most people won't. It's taken me 15, right? So maybe it's longer, but in my opinion, it's a lifelong pursuit. And if we band together as a tribe like this, then yeah, we'll eventually be 10,000 strong and so on. But it doesn't that's not the goal. The goal is to create financial freedom in each person's lives, and we track it. We track how close people are to it, so we can hold them accountable and such. So yeah, it's pretty personal.
Love that. And it's taken us 12 years to be an overnight success. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So guys, definitely check out White Feather. Check out my brother, Kelly. Kelly, thank you so much, brother. I love you. I appreciate you. You're amazing. You got a beautiful family, and thank you for what you do. Guys, like I said earlier, if you love coffee, let me know if you like coffee and you want to save veterans' lives. If you love honey, just let us know. And guys, I usually wear my other T-shirt. It says, "Today I decide," because I'm a big Joel Osteen guy, and I believe that we can either choose to be a victim or the victor. I choose to be the victor, and I hope you guys make that same decision. Sir, I just want to say thank you, brother. I'm so grateful for you, and hopefully we can just start our generational relationship.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
All right, brother. Have an amazing week. And guys, I'll see you tomorrow. And remember, vertical momentum. The only way to go is up. I love you guys. Talk to you tomorrow.